Happy Wisdom Wednesday, everyone. So this week's book of the week is a Silicon Valley classic, but a classic that many people actually forgot about or didn't even know about. And that's Only the Paranoid Survive by Andrew S. Grove, chairman of the board of Intel Corporation. It's about how to exploit the crisis points that challenge every company. It was a 1997 Time Magazine Man of the Year. Many of you don't even know who this is, which really disappoints me. But many of you do know the idea of OKRs, or Objective Key Results, something that Google really popularized. Well, you're looking at the man who actually came up with that in his extremely popular book, High Output Management. Now, many of you do know this, and this book is specifically about how you manage an organization towards goals and you align people. Great book, highly recommend it. But now this book, why did he write this book? Well, very, very interesting story behind it. Now, Andy Grove was the chairman and CEO of one of the world's most prestigious companies in tech. And what he quickly realized, and one of the quotes he says, is that business success has its own seeds of destruction, because success breeds complacency, and complacency ultimately leads to your own destruction. And that's why only the paranoid survive. Now, while this book can be definitely taken out of context, because the whole idea isn't, hey, let's breed paranoia and fear among us, but in a way, if you do it in the right way, in a strategic way, you can, and this can be a competitive edge to your company, and more importantly, in a way to make sure that you move along with what's called these 10x forces that bring these paradigm shifting changes to business. So what are those forces? Let's get into it. So in the book, Grove talks about Michael Porter, who's a famous business author and management consultant, who comes up with the 5 forces that determine how competitive a company is. Now, this diagram has been adapted, and Andrew Grove introduces a 6th force, which is the force of complementers, right? And this is a really big theme back during the Intel days, when microchips and memories, all these things were changing. And complementers, as you can see in this graph, is that these are essentially businesses whom your customers can buy complementary products, right? So each company's product works better, or sometimes only works with the other company's products. Cars need gasoline, gasoline need cars. Computers need software, software needs computers. But with complementers, right, they have the same interests as your business and travel the same road. And you can think of them as fellow travelers. And while your interests might be aligned, your products support each other, right? However, new techniques, new approaches, new technologies can upset the older order and change the relative influence of the complementers, or cause the path of the fellow travelers to diverge from yours. Again, think about the music industry, right? When we were buying CDs, and then that big 10x multiplier or force was Spotify, and the introduction, well, not really Spotify, but essentially Napster, right? With the introduction of streaming music. Think about the movie industry when Netflix and streaming came out, right? And so this introduces the main theme of the book that Grove talks about, which is the strategic inflection points. So what about a 10x force? What are some good examples of that? Well, let me give you one that many of you lived through as a kid, which is when Walmart comes into town. That's a 10x force. Essentially, it changes everything about the retail landscape in that town, right? Some retailers are wiped out. Other ones decide to get more focused and niche down, in which case they're able to compete with Walmart. If Walmart doesn't have a wide variety of, let's say, a certain product, let's say hardware tools, a really niche-focused hardware store is able to compete with Walmart. But Walmart coming into a small town is a 10x factor. Another one that's much, much older is that when there were silent movies, right, and the shift turned into movies with sound, there was a lot of resistance to it. Charlie Chaplin even resisted against and didn't want to change. But that 10x force also introduced the birth of these new and widely popular actors and actresses that took advantage of that 10x force. So I have a list of 5 key takeaways I want to run you guys through really quick. Again, not a replacement to the reading, but a supplement. But there is one story that really sticks out to me in this book, and that was when Grove was talking to Gordon Moore, who's an exec back then. And yes, that's Gordon Moore, who came up with Moore's Law, right? And essentially, this is what happened. They were in the middle of dealing with a 10x force and a strategic inflection point, and they're trying to figure out their way out of it. And reading from the book, Grove writes this: I remember a time in the middle of 1985 after this aimless wandering had been going on for almost a year. I was in my office with Intel's chairman and CEO, Gordon Moore, and we were discussing our quandary. Our mood was downbeat. I looked out the window at the Ferris wheel of the Great American Amusement Park revolving in the distance, and then I turned back to Gordon and asked, if we got kicked out and the board brought in a new CEO, what do you think he would do? And Gordon answered without hesitation, he would get us out of memories. I stared at him numb, then said, well, why shouldn't you and I just walk out the door and then just come back in and do it ourselves? And the point of this was that back then, Intel was so focused on memories and they did not want to change. And Japan was starting to get ahead of them in microchips. And this is where Intel made this big change, right? But it started by paying attention to the strategic inflection point. And again, it comes from this paranoia and fear of thinking about what is that 10x force that's going to come and change and disrupt us, right? Because the whole point of his book here is that success breeds the seeds of destruction. Those seeds of destruction are complacency, because once you get complacent, right, you're no longer paranoid. And if you're not paranoid, you will not survive, because when those 10x forces come, you will be left in their wake. So let's head over to the whiteboard with a little internet magic and go through some of those takeaways. Gotta love that internet magic. All right, so 5 quick key takeaways from the book. So number 1, strategic inflection points are inevitable. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. There's always gonna be something that happens from your market, from your customers, from other products, that's going to potentially make this huge change. You have to be paranoid. And the only way you get paranoid is by heightening your awareness and constantly asking these questions and being on the lookout for it. Now, being on the lookout for it, right? Yeah, data is going to be helpful, but data is not going to tell you everything. Data is usually just telling you what happened in the past. As it goes into the future, it can't always predict the future. Look at Blockbuster. Blockbuster's looked at its data when it was able to acquire Netflix, I think for $50 million. And Blockbuster said, well, based on our data, our customers really enjoy going to the store and enjoying that in-store experience, right? So you got to look beyond the data and really pay attention and ask those hard questions. Number 3, so use fear to increase awareness, not to paralyze, right? And the way you should think about fear is not something you instill in your employees to get them to do things, but you have to use fear to ask hard questions, which is, are we doing the best we can? What can displace us, right? Because fear, and this is the key, is the opposite of complacency when used the right way. And if you think about fear from an evolutionary standpoint, when you are afraid, your senses are heightened, right? But you don't want to be living in a state of fear where it's paralyzing you. The point is that you have to be a little bit on the edge. So even when you think about the world of sports, like with greats, let's say like Michael Jordan, right? Michael Jordan didn't put himself into a state of fear where he was paralyzed, but a state of fear where he constantly pushed himself to outwork and outsmart his competitors, right? That's the whole point here. That also brings us to number 4, which is separate the signal from the noise, right? And so a lot of times there's gonna be a lot of noise, whether it's data or people in the company. You have to try and get to the source of truth. Grove talks about this concept of listening to your Cassandras, right? Cassandra was a priestess during Troy who was trying to warn people about the fall of Troy, and no one listened to her, right? And so try and get to the source of truth and separate, again, the signal from the noise, right? A lot of times when you're dealing with middle management, people are not on the front line. That can often be the noise, right? Which is why it's important for middle management to get closer to the source of truth on the front lines. And the final thing is commit to action. And Grove shares this piece of advice by saying that most companies don't die because they're wrong. They die because they don't commit at all. So that's your book of the week. I definitely recommend it. They added a new chapter, which was the impact of strategic inflection points on your career. And I think, especially the world that we live in, look at the strategic inflection point we just went with COVID, right? There's always these things that change that not only are going to disrupt and change businesses, but also your career. So check it out. Make sure you buy it. As always, happy Wisdom Wednesday, and I'll see you next week. Bye for now.